Hi, my name is Pasquier. I will explain in this video the introduction to the course's text. The course has other parts such as a workbook and a manual, which have their own introduction. The text, which is the first part of the book, begins with the following introduction. Kenneth Wapnick shared how and why this introduction was written in his book, Absence from Felicity, the story of Helen Schucman and her scribing of A Course in Miracles. What he explains in this book is that the introduction is not the first text that Helen Schucman wrote down, contrary to what is sometimes said. Rather, the text began with the dictation of the Principles of Miracles, which are opening the first chapter. It was Helen who would have said to Jesus, complaining about the difficulty of the teaching he transmitted to her, that it was surely just an elective course, to which Jesus would have replied, "No, it is not optional, it is a required course." She would also have said to Jesus that his course could not begin with, "There is no other difficulty in miracles." That became the first sentence of the first principle of miracles. Because Helen thought, being very logical, that such a sentence could not be used to introduce a text or a statement, and the introduction would have been dictated to her afterwards. There are several important concepts in this beautiful presentation of the course. I will now give indications on the meaning of these concepts. Jesus, who speaks throughout the course, tells us, first of all, that this course is compulsory or required, meaning that we do not have the choice to do it. Indeed, it is mandatory in the sense that everyone, no matter who they are or where they come from, if they exist somewhere in the dream of the world, well, they will stop dreaming and awaken to God, that means to reality, when they are ready. The possible misinterpretation here is that we may think that the course will necessarily take the form it has in the Big Blue Book titled A Course in Miracles. In fact, what is stated in this introduction does not mean that everyone must read A Course in Miracles and that their personal program is the one described in this book. Rather, it says that whatever form or life path or journey it takes, we will all return to the love and peace of heaven at the right moment, even if, being in the grip of the ego, we are terrified of releasing ourselves from our dream of being a body in the world. According to A Course in Miracles, God or heaven is the only reality. Everything else is just an illusion. Therefore, the world we imagine ourselves living in is nothing but our dream, and this dream only appears real to us because we believe in it. To believe that the world and the bodies exist and that what happens to these bodies in this world is real is to be trapped in form. It is the trap in which all human beings have fallen. As such, there is perhaps no greater trap for A Course in Miracles students than to believe that the course they are taking is the Big Blue Book that bears this title and that this book is very important. I just said that the course, compulsory as it is, does not necessarily have to take the form of the book entitled A Course in Miracles. But the opposite is also true. The curriculum followed by students of the course is not this book as such, because this book is not real. Indeed, if there is no world, as we learned from lesson 132, then there is no book either, nor any other object. It is its content that is true, and this content is what it says, and what it says is spiritual, abstract, transcendent, not material. I would point out, moreover, that it is the mind and not the brain or another organ of the body which can notice that what the book says is true. The preface to the course specifies that perception is a function of the body and that it is therefore a limit to consciousness. By perception, we see through the eyes and we hear through the ears of the body, but we do not understand anything through the sense organs. The body is limited to receiving the data transmitted by perception or the senses. Understanding comes only from the mind. This distinction between the understanding of meaning or knowledge and the perception of the illusory world by the senses is already found in Plato, for example in the Republic and in the Theaetetus, two dialogues relating to knowledge. And what Plato and the Jesus of the course say is that perception lies, or senses lie, not from time to time, like we would like to think, but all the time. To summarize, truth is in the mind, not in a book or in the world. So when we recognize the truth somewhere, in a book or a speech, for example, it is that the mind has recognized and found itself. Therefore, it makes no sense to cling to the book and the idea that one is a student of the course. Jesus wants to help us liberate ourselves from our ego and not to make us his disciples, believers or activists identified with a doctrine or a cause. There is no particular pride in being a student of the course or in following any spiritual path for that matter, since we are all going through what the course calls a journey without distance, a path that leads us to our true self, which we have never really left. This is also why teaching the course is first and foremost embodying its content, its message of love and peace in what we say or do, or by our silence and calm, because we are not even forced to speak when the heart is open. Stillness is a much better way to teach peace and love than preaching or teaching in a traditional way, aiming to instill ideas or doctrines. A teacher of God according to the course is simply a loving, humble, and welcoming person who has learned as much as possible to put aside his pride or his amour propre, or what the course calls his ego. A teacher of God is therefore not necessarily or exclusively someone who studies A Course in Miracles or gives courses or talks on A Course in Miracles. Jesus then tells us that we are free to do whatever we want. We can listen to the ego in pursuit of personal goals, whether those goals are considered selfish or selfless by world standards. And there's nothing wrong with that, because if we think we are here, that's because it is what we have chosen. In fact, we will follow the ego as long as we have not suffered enough, that we will not have experienced all the disappointments, the horrors, and the sufferings of the world. If someone does not understand this crucial aspect and says that everything is fine in his life, that he is satisfied with his personal quest for happiness, then the course, in the general sense of a program of return to reality or God, is not yet for him. He has not reached the point where he wants to abandon what the course calls the toys of the world. And this is very well also. There is nothing wrong with continuing to follow the ego. We all do that. but it is clear that we will never be truly happy or at peace this way, even if we believe otherwise, because there will always be death, the inevitable end of all terrestrial life, of all body, and therefore of all human project. Consequently, one cannot be sincerely and seriously interested in the search for truth and in spirituality, and for this reason in a work like A Course in Miracles, unless one has fallen into the depths of despair and has decided to get out of it once and for all. It is then that we tell ourselves that there must be another path, and that we choose to listen to the voice of our inner guide rather than follow the wrong tracks of the ego. In the Course, this guide is Jesus or the Holy Spirit, who is called not only a guide but also a mediator, teacher, translator of the laws of God, comforter, healer, and friend. But it is important to understand that the Holy Spirit is not an entity separate from our mind. He is our inner voice, our guidance, our innermost self, our true self. In the words of the Course, it is the real and eternal part of our mind, which is one with God, that has never been separated from God, and which it is a question of finding or acknowledging. Jesus also states in this introduction that even if we are free, the curriculum or program to return to reality, to what the Course calls God or heaven, cannot be established by us. We cannot achieve peace or love on our own, because our means are those of the ego. We seek to satisfy our needs or our desires, and we strive to make our fears disappear, rather than to let us be guided towards peace and love by remaining calm and receptive. We can choose this program, we can decide when we follow it, but we cannot determine what it is. The program or the curriculum is fixed and unique in terms of its content. This content is the same for everyone, even if it does not take the form of A Course in Miracles. The program is pre-established because, as is often said in the Course, reality is unchangeable. When you wake up, whether by studying A Course in Miracles or following any other path, it becomes perfectly clear. Nothing is changed. The illusion which veil reality simply disappear. We can see that nothing has ever happened. No one has ever been born, died, or done anything. We didn't do anything. Nothing happened. Nothing and no one as spirit has changed, since what is real cannot change, and what we are is spirit. This is why the Course describes the world as a dream or an illusion. Once the goal is reached, the path is erased. It's as if it had never existed. We see that the goal had always been reached, that we had never strayed from it. Peace and love had never left us. It was us who told to ourselves the story that we were alone, abandoned, attacked, or left in this world without love or support, the story of our life. This is also why this journey is described in the Course as a journey without distance. The journey to God is merely the reawakening of the knowledge of where you are always and what you are forever. It is a journey without distance to a goal that has never changed. Truth can only be experienced. It cannot be described and it cannot be explained. Here, the Course reaches the limits of what can be expressed. You cannot know what it is unless you live it, experience it yourself. The paradox is that it cannot happen to you, because when it happens, you're not there anymore. There is no you, no ego. Then Jesus says it is not a course on love, because the meaning of love is not taught. Love is lived, experienced very concretely. So there can be no such thing as a course on love, because one does not need to learn to love. To love is a natural expression of our being, and it is to not love, or to put it better, to block the expression of love, which is not natural. Therefore, the purpose of the Course is to help us unlock our heart. One may think that the way we're talking here about love is soppy and naive. However, Jesus does not speak at all of affection, romantic love, or friendship, but of the love of God, an absolutely pure and perfect love, totally disinterested and selfless, bearing no trace of the ego and completely transcending what the Course calls our special love relationships, meaning our bonds with the people, animals, or things around us that we appreciate and cherish in the world. Divine love encompasses everything without any discrimination. The love of God makes no distinction between beings. And it's about us, if we want to find peace of mind, to let that love be, to let it express itself from our heart. That love is so strong and powerful, one has absolutely no idea what it is if one knows nothing but human love. The method of the Course is clearly stated in the introduction. Jesus does not ask us to do anything, but to undo our blockages. That is to say, our ego. It's not a question of doing, but undoing. So it's not about learning something new, adding anything to what we know or what we have, since if we have love, we already have everything. It is rather a question of removing what is in excess, of removing all the illusions hiding reality from us and preventing us from expressing the love that we are and from being at peace. Because if love is not taught, but does not seem present, it is because we are blocking its natural manifestation. These blockages are caused by our fears, our guilt, our anger, our hatred, our sense of injustice, our thirst for revenge, our sadness, and our despair. Here we see the psychological and spiritual aspect of the Course. It teaches us to unlearn what we have learned by choosing the ego. We have learned to feel incomplete and guilty, to experience gaps and needs, and therefore to desire and to fear. We want to fill these gaps, satisfy these needs, and we are afraid of not being able to do so, or in any case, not totally or definitively. The purpose of studying, practicing the Course is to help us overcome our desires and fears, or better put, to let go of them in order to achieve peace. This is what we can call the practical, concrete level of A Course in Miracles. However, even if we speak of practice, of application, it is important to remember that what Jesus is asking for is not to change behavior, but to change our thinking, our mind. You may believe that you are responsible for what you do, but not for what you think. The truth is that you are responsible for what you think, because it is only at this level that you can exercise choice. What you do comes from what you think. And a little further, he says, you must change your mind, not your behavior. The reason for these recommendations is that what we think influences what we do, not the other way around. Despite what we might think, here is what Jesus also says on this subject. I have said that you cannot change your mind by changing your behavior. But I have also said and many times that you can change your mind. When your mood tells you that you have chosen wrongly, and this is so whenever you are not joyous, then no, this need not be. In other words, we can rest in peace. A blessing, says Jesus, which does not apply to the dead, but to the living. Here the paradox is that when one awakens and the mind is healed, one realizes that neither oneself nor anybody could ever really change his mind, since the spirit or true mind, being reality, is unalterable and therefore unchangeable. This is further explained when Jesus says, by changing his mind, the Son of God has changed the most powerful device that was ever given him for change. This in no way contradicts the changelessness of mind as God created it, but you think that you have changed it as long as you learn through the ego. This places you in a position of needing to learn a lesson that seems contradictory. You must learn to change your mind about your mind. Only by this can you learn that it is changeless. When you heal, that is exactly what you are learning. In other words, when our spirit finally awakens, we find that in reality, the Holy Spirit who dwells in everyone never changes as mind or spirit. He is one and the same in all because spirit is immutable, eternal, unchangeable. In short, we can at most dream, but we cannot change reality. This is also the reason why Jesus says, seek not to change the world, but choose to change your mind about the world. It is pointless, indeed, to seek to modify something which, in any case, does not really exist. Dualism involves opposites, good and evil, soul and body, pleasure and pain, and so on. Now, Jesus teaches us that its course is rigorously, absolutely non-dualistic. There is only love, only the peace of God or heaven, which is real. There is no opposite to love. Everything else is just a vast illusion. Time, space, and matter do not really exist. Our lives, imbued with all kinds of thoughts and emotions, with a multitude of memories, are only stories that we tell ourselves. One has to be careful not to commit a common misunderstanding here. We are not asked to become insensitive, uncaring, to deny the suffering, and to pretend that there is nothing important in the world. It would be making the same mistake, but in the opposite form. Rather than being convinced of the reality of the world, as is the case for almost everyone, we try to convince ourselves that it is not real, without actually experiencing it. Now there is no point in denying or repudiating what is not real, since that amounts to granting it power over our mind, and therefore affirming that it is real. The Course also says this: the body is merely part of your experience in the physical world. Its abilities can be and frequently are over-evaluated. However, it is almost impossible to deny its existence in this world. Those who do so are engaging in a particularly unworthy form of denial. The term unworthy here implies only that it is not necessary to protect the mind by denying the unmindful. In other words, if we deny this unfortunate or regrettable aspect of the power of the mind to act as if there were a world and bodies, or to miscreate, to take a neologism of the Course, we deny at the same time the very power of the mind, and we condemn ourselves to weakness, to helplessness. We are only replacing victimization. I am only a poor victim of this cruel world, which is very real and mean. So we're replacing this victimization by denial. The world has no power over me. I'm a vegan. I have a vigorous and healthy body. I will live very old until I decide by myself to leave my body and such and such. So we replace victimization by denial. One can even dream of physical immortality, which does not change the real problem, which is the feeling of separation, lack, emptiness that we often feel without being fully aware of it. Bodies are always going to have something, being sick, injured, or disabled, aging, wasting away, and so on. But this is not where the problem is. The real problem is in the mind. It's not the body. The problem is metaphysical and not physical. There is only one problem: feeling separate, apart, lonely, or sad, and only one solution: returning to God. That means returning to love and peace, to perfect unity. The Course says that treating the symptoms of the disease, changing our living conditions, trying to improve the world and heal the bodies, does nothing to solve the real problem. That is not to say that we should not do these things: wash our teeth, go to school or go to work, and generally speaking, solve technical and practical problems in the world. But while we do these things, to fight against the body or the world or the situation or others is to make them real, to give them power to hurt us, to make us suffer. The only solution is to heal the mind by changing the thought system, not worrying about this world, where events seem to be happening, and these bodies which seem to act in this world, because in any case they are not actually there. I return now to the theme of non-dualism. We find absolutely fundamental statements about the nature of reality throughout the Course, including that the world and the bodies do not exist, and have in fact never been at all. For example, in lessons 132 and 169. This metaphysical idea that the material world is not real must never leave our mind when we try to apply the lessons of the Course. Otherwise, everything that Jesus is saying about forgiveness and atonement will be understood in the traditional sense and will have no meaning at all. It is the theoretical or metaphysical, that is to say abstract level of A Course in Miracles, which cannot be separated from the practical level. In the dualistic world we're living in, we are constantly losing sight of the abstract reality of our being, the stillness, the fullness, and the blissfulness of ourself. In other words, we do not feel anymore the love or the peace of God in our daily life. Rather, we are preoccupied with our concerns, work, housework, meals, taking care of children or pets, sports, entertainment, and leisure. We only feel that we are in our own bag of skin amidst other things and bodies. Like right now, as you are watching this video, you hear my voice, my accent, you see my face, and you may have a feeling of me being this or that in your mind. Because what you are seeing is a lie. It's an illusion. I am not there, and neither you are. I'm talking to my own consciousness, which is inside you, because we are not separate beings. Our mind is one and the same. If you understand what I'm saying, it's because you are here with me in my mind, and I am there with you in your mind. Our mind is one single spirit. There is no body, no world, nothing except the reality of our essence, which is love, or peace, or God, whatever the name you give to that reality. So we have to understand, at least intellectually at first, even if we don't feel like we are actually experiencing it, that the world is not real. Because the idea that the world is not real, but projected by the mind that has chosen to separate from reality, is absolutely fundamental. The entire course is based on it. It is indeed our mind that projects onto the world the suffering or hatred that we carry inside. I remind that this does not mean that we must deny our earthly experience with everything that it entails by pretending that nothing is important and by making fun of what is happening in the world, in people's lives. It would be absurd and indelicate towards others to laugh at suffering and death, even if the Course tells us that they are not real. Real meaning here independent of the projection of the mind. We still have to learn to live in the illusion, accept that we have chosen it, while remaining aware that our true reality, our own essence, is not of this world. From a spiritual point of view, we do not belong to the material world. What seems to exist here is just an illusion. Thus, the course we have to take to get out of the illusion is not in itself the big blue book titled A Course in Miracles. The true course is in our minds. The book simply reminds us of what is already there present in our mind, but which we have forgotten. It reminds us the love of God in us, the calm behind our agitation, the peace that goes past all the worries of this world, but which our emotional or mental blockings prevent us from feeling in the deepest of ourselves. In short, the course or program should not be confused with the book, let alone with any group, religion, or movement. When Jesus says at the end of the introduction that nothing real can be threatened and nothing unreal exists, he is actually telling us that we need not be afraid. There is nothing to fear, says the Course, devoting lesson 48 entirely to this idea. There is nothing to fear indeed if the reality of our being cannot change and if what seems threatening, dangerous, or stressful does not really exist. Now, it's interesting to note that Helen Schucman was terrified by the material she was receiving from Jesus. She was not at ease at all with Jesus' teachings because they meant the total letting go of the ego, and we cling to our ego because we fear what we will become without it. We are extremely afraid of the unknown, of what living without the ego would be. This reaction seems to be out of our control, but in fact we know we could get rid of the ego, and we know also deep inside that it doesn't even exist for real. And that's why we are so terrified like Helen was. Here, Jesus says, being afraid seems to be involuntary, something beyond your own control. My control can take over everything that does not matter, while my guidance can direct everything that does, if you so choose. Fear cannot be controlled by me, but it can be self-controlled. Fear prevents me from giving you my control. Since Jesus represents in us the presence of love, and love excluding fear, it is obvious that being afraid excludes or blocks love and makes it imperceptible, while being inspired by love is surrendering to it. Jesus also says, fear is always a sign of strain, arising whenever what you want conflicts with what you do. Let me explain the rest of this passage, which describes how this conflict presents itself. We can act in a conflicting way, choosing to take actions that are in conflict with each other. In this case, one part of the mind is outraged by the other, and we are frustrated to have acted by doing what we consider to have been a bad choice. We can also do what we think love wants us to do, but without wanting to do it entirely, because the ego is not defeated or undone. In the first case, there is mainly frustration. In the second, there is a great tension. Either way, we do what we don't really want to. Still on fear, the Course says, only your mind can produce fear. It does so whenever it is conflicted in what it wants, producing inevitable strain because wanting and doing are discordant. In short, when we act without love, by blocking the expression of love, we then do what we don't really want to do, because we think we want something that in fact we don't actually want. And that is because you can never really want what the ego wants. Fear therefore comes from this internal conflict between will and action. To undo this error that we commit by submitting to the ego while resisting it, we must first recognize that when we are in conflict internally, in other words, when we are not at peace, it is because we are fearful. We fear that our ego will be defeated, and in fact it will be. We then seek to protect our ego without really wanting it, and this is what makes us tense, tired, or disappointed. Finally, we must remember that fear arises from the lack of love, or better put, from the attempt to suffocate, to block love in us. But when you let love express itself and guide the mind, it melts the ego, the tension or strain ceases, and the fear goes away. But how can we let go of fear? Hence, the need for miracles or forgiveness, concepts that I will address in other videos.